Welcome to week 14 of Mastering the Mastermind. This one's our first customer suggested topic. Today we're going to talk about momentary buttons and momentary actions and what the differences are. If you haven't reviewed the videos on IA buttons, you definitely want to do that first. Otherwise, this isn't going to make a lot of sense. Okay, so with any kind of push button switch, there are two kinds of actions available in a mechanical push button switch. They can either be latching or momentary. Latching buttons, when you press them once, they turn on, and you press them again, they turn off, and they just alternate between on and off every time you press it. Momentary buttons are on when you press them, and then they turn off when you release them. And that's pretty much the only options. On the masterminds, the buttons are configurable to be one or the other. Just FYI, the buttons are actually mechanically all momentary buttons, but through software we can make them act like latching buttons if needed. And this is kind of an important aside that if you buy an external switch, you do need it to be a momentary type switch. Some customers have wondered, like, well, I want my switch to be latching and I want it to, turn on when I push it and turn off when I push it again. But just the way we've wired the mastermind and the way the firmware works, you do need the switch to be momentary, and then the mastermind itself will take care of the details of switching between latching or momentary. Okay, so we've configured this Mastermind GT with a couple of buttons here, and this first one is a momentary button. And I'll show you in the settings here that on any IA button there's a checkbox, and if you set that to momentary, the button will be, of course, momentary, and turning off the checkbox will make the button latching. So coming back to the GT, we look at this, and here's our momentary button. I press it, it turns on. I release it, it turns off. Simple as can be. So what happens under the hood with our button actions, that any MIDI messages or any other actions that are on there, those will send their on value when I press the button, and they will send their off value when we release it. And this is useful for things like notes, playing notes on a synth or a sampler or something. Certain effects, if you just want it to be on for a few beats, setting up a momentary button for that is great. You can just hold it and then release it when you're done with it. Things like that. It's pretty simple. The limitations of momentary buttons are that they don't work with a lot of other functions. They don't work with groups or IA linking and all that, because they're never really on except for when you're holding them. And so the things that automatically turn buttons on and off tend not to work with momentary buttons. And so you have to keep that in mind. So the other thing there is when creating actions for a button, there are CC toggle actions, which you would normally use, but there are also CC momentary actions. And what that does is it does something kind of like what the button, a momentary button would do, but instead it's just for that action. So if we set up a button that is not momentary but has a CC momentary action, you'll see it visibly looks like like a latching button. I press it once and it turns on, and I press it again and it turns off. But what's happening is, if you look at the actions here, the CC momentary action will basically, what happens is that when we press the button, the CC momentary sends its on value, and when I release the button, the CC momentary action sends its off value. And so even though the button will toggle on and off, the action itself will behave momentary. And this is kind of a special case. It's not one that you would use very often. But in certain cases, and I just had a customer contact me about this recently, that some MIDI devices, especially older ones, might expect their CCs to be coming in a sort of a momentary fashion. And so you only can tell it instead of sending a message saying turn on or sending a message saying turn off, you can just say change. And so, it's on and you send the message and it turns off, and send the message again and it turns on. And so by using this button, this action type, you can basically have this on-off state follow follow what the device is doing, but in reality, it's just sending the same message every time you press it. So that's it. In summary, most of the time you would use a momentary button. It's just a few of these unusual devices that need different style of control for MIDI messages, where you might use CC Momentary. And definitely don't use both the Momentary checkbox and CC Momentary at the same time, because you're going to, it's not going to work. So like I said, normally use CC or use the Momentary checkbox and you should be fine. That's all for this week. As always, remember to like and subscribe, and please keep the topics coming. We'd love to answer your questions. Thanks.